Greetings, all. So I want to talk about a trend in film criticism that I don't like, and that is the use of the word woke as a pejorative when criticizing movies. Now, obviously, if you don't know, what you probably do because it's all over the general discourse of the United States political scene, the term woke, when it's used in a negative connotation, is usually meant to convey that there is some sort of liberal or progressive identity politics that a certain segment of right-wing people don't like. So you see this a lot with Florida bills and things like that within the political scene. But I want to focus mainly on film criticism for this one. So when someone... it's not a big trend in mainstream film criticism, aside from maybe like Armand White or print journalists who write for right-wing publications like National Review or The Economist or something. It's not mainly professional film critics who are doing this. It's mainly like YouTube film critics, and to a lesser extent, you don't see it as much on Letterboxd either. I think Letterboxd doesn't skew conservative anyway. But you see it a lot with YouTube, and there's always... thumbnails that are very like clickbaity. It was like, oh, this woke thing, and all they're reporting on is, oh, Brie Larson got hired for a movie. I don't know why Brie Larson became like the boogeyman for right-wing fans of like nerd products. I guess it was because of Captain Marvel, and during that time she was like, straight white males don't like the movie wasn't made for you, and that's fine. I think the way she presented that comment came across as more harsh than she probably meant it. I think what she meant is like, straight white males like myself have had a monopoly over the entertainment industry, the critics, society basically since European colonialism. So maybe let someone else have a voice, and so most people aren't threatened by that, but apparently some YouTube chuds were. But it's kind of... I'm noticing a trend where this has become a criticism of movies, but it's not a valid criticism. Roger Ebert once famously said something along the lines of, the worst thing you can do as a film critic is bring something to a movie and insist that you found it there. So the idea is you're not reading the text of the film to come up with your interpretation or your opinion. You're basically just bringing something of your own personality to it and then blaming the movie for it being there, but all you did was project yourself onto it. But let's talk about messages or politics in movies. Since that's sort of the loop around to what this is. Every movie that comes out has some sort of message. It's not necessarily a political message, but every movie is communicating something. And there can be conscious messages, so those are messages that the filmmakers intended for the movie to express. And then there's subconscious messages, which are in the movie, either because... the filmmakers believe in that message and they didn't think they were putting it in there, but they were putting that in there anyway because they just couldn't help it, or it was just part of what they were doing. Or it could be a message that just spouts up from the text of the piece. One of the examples I use of subconscious messaging is Zack Snyder's Sucker Punch. Now, that movie is not meant to be misogynist. In fact, I believe the intention between Snyder and the other filmmakers was to make something that was complete opposite. I think they thought they were making a feminist movie. But when you make a movie where all of the female characters are constantly under threat of sexual violence and the one female who survives is the one who is willing to capitulate to the male captors and doesn't want to fight back, you're kind of making a misogynist movie, aside from the movie just not being good in general. So that's a case where I don't think the filmmakers were setting out to make something misogynist, but based on the text of the film and the story and how it progresses and everything, it comes across with a misogynist message. So I don't know how many people feel this way, but there's a certain segment of people who are always going to dislike a movie if the message of that movie conflicts with their own. So if you're a conservative, you'll hate any movie that has a liberal message, and vice versa. I think one of the traits that shows that you have grown up as a film critic or as someone who is ingesting media or art is if you can recognize that even if you disagree with a piece of work, that doesn't in and of itself make the work bad. I mean, sometimes the message of the movie can be so heinous or egregious that it does automatically make it bad. Unplanned from Pure Flix, for instance. But for the most part, you should know that disagreeing with the movie in and of itself does not make a movie bad. Now, one of the biggest examples I can pull up with for my own life, so if for some reason this is the first video of mine you're watching, I'm a Marxist. So obviously movies that have a right-wing slant are not going to appeal to me generally. But one of my favorite movies has a right-wing message, and that is 1984's Ghostbusters, directed by Ivan Reitman. Ghostbusters doesn't put its politics like right in your face, but it's still there on the surface level. It's a movie about, well, until Ernie Hudson comes in, it's about 3 white schlubby guys who are kicked out of academia, and they start their own business, and their main villain is, the main human villain, is a representative of the EPA. And it's sort of about, you know, the glories of free market capitalism and starting your own business and fighting against government overreach and all that stuff. A bunch of, you know, Ayn Rand libertarian bullshit, you know, from the Reagan 80s. I completely disagree with that political message, but it's still one of my favorite movies because that message in and of itself does not capsize the movie. It just adds like an extra layer to interpret and be like, oh, it's funny how this movie that on the surface, or at least from a casual glance, might appear to be just a fun apolitical movie, still has the politics of the era and of the filmmakers, because I believe Ivan Reitman, before he died, said he was a libertarian himself. It still imbued itself into the work. But conversely, you can agree with the politics of a movie, and the movie can do a bad job of expressing those politics or just be bad in general. And a recent example of that I can point to is the 2019 remake of Black Christmas. The political message of Black Christmas is stuff that I would agree with, and most people who are either liberals or leftists, because liberals and leftists are not the same, might agree with, which is sort of a feminist, you know, anti-patriarchy, rape culture stuff, you know, stuff that anyone outside of super right-wing chuds would agree with. But the movie does a very bad job of expressing those ideas in a way that doesn't come across as ham-fisted and inelegant. And that's kind of where I want to draw the line as far as, is everyone who uses the word woke as a pejorative just a flaming neo-Nazi, right-wing, Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump-loving fucker? I don't think so. I think a lot are, maybe even most, but I don't think all of them. I think some of them are just using the right-wing dog whistle mentality. And the word woke didn't start with the right wing. It's kind of like how Antifa is short for Anti-Fascist Action, which is an organization that's existed since post-World War II to fight back fascist rising in Germany during the separation and the Reconstruction after World War II and stuff like that. But then shortening that to Antifa, or Antifa, however you want to pronounce it, that became like a dog whistle. It was like, oh, Antifa's around the corner. I'm like, bitch, and Antifa's just they're not even a solid organization with a hierarchy. It's just a bunch of people who don't like fascism and want to stop the tide of it if they see it coming. And the people who are like throwing Molotov cocktails and stuff, that's actually a subsegment of them called the Black Bloc, but regardless, outside. So the people who are using woke as a pejorative but aren't super right-wing chuds, what they probably are trying to express is that they feel that the identity politics of a piece are ham-handed, ham-fisted, inelegantly put in, that they're not woven into the film in a way that feels organic. But it is weird that it's mostly just the identity politics that this is for, because there's other movies that have left-wing economic messages or left-wing revolutionary messages. You know, I don't remember a lot of right-wing critics being like, oh, sorry to bother you from Boots Riley is woke, even though that's a left, very left message, not even liberal, that is full-on leftist. Or recently I saw How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which is a very leftist movie as well. And that's also one that has a very diverse cast as well, as far as race and sexual orientation and whatever. Now, it might be because right-wing critics just aren't watching those movies. So most of the criticism that you see where it's like woke and, you know, a clickbait, they're talking about Star Wars or Marvel or something that's usually in geek culture, weirdly, but basically just mainstream stuff. I mean, and then there are some people who are saying, like, oh, Star Trek is woke, and, like, have you watched an episode of Star Trek prior to 2000? It takes place in an atheist socialist utopia. Of course it's woke. What the fuck is wrong with you? And so it's really just not proper film criticism to do that. And if you can't put your own personal politics or beliefs to the side when watching a movie, or if those things get in the way of your ability to, as objectively as you can, critique a work of art, that is not a problem with the movie, that's a problem with you. And I'll give you an example from me, where I have a personal belief that prevented me from liking a movie that otherwise would probably be liked more by others. And that is the Martin Scorsese's movie Silence. Silence is a movie about a Jesuit priest. He's trying to preach Christianity in Japan, and during this time, Japan was very intolerant of Christians coming in, so they would, torture them or arrest them or kill them, whatever. I think the main religion at the time of the movie is Shintoism, if I'm not mistaken. I've only seen the movie once, and it was a few years ago when it first came out. Now, the movie wants to be... So Martin Scorsese, he's a Catholic. He has very positive feelings toward religion in general, or at least... respectful feelings. So when he's dealt with different types of religion in movies, so there's Silence, Kundun, Last Temptation of Christ, some other stuff, he tends to look at it with a very sympathetic eye, which I do not. I am fervently atheist, anti-theist. I don't respect any religion at all. I'm very anti-religion. So when I see this movie, that boils down to the Jesuit priest played by Andrew Garfield. He could easily go free if he basically just agrees to walk on a picture of Jesus and they'll let him go. And he refuses to do this. And in my head, I'm like, okay, if you're a true believer, doesn't it still make sense to just do this and then, like, apologize to your God, who you believe is omnipotent and knows what's in your heart, just so you can get free and not starve to death in a Japanese prison? But instead he, like, refuses, and so you're meant to be like, oh, this man with his beliefs and sacrifice, and I'm watching the movie like, this guy's a brainwashed fucking idiot, and I don't feel sorry for anything he's going through, which is more about me than about the film. The film itself, I mean, it's Martin Scorsese, so technically flawless. And I understand what Scorsese is going for from someone who has a sympathetic view toward religion and belief and faith. So when I wrote my review of Silence, which I think I've ported it over to Letterboxd at the time, I sort of put down that, this, as I write this and I give this I think I gave it like the equivalent of like a C or a 2-star or whatever, is like, as I write this negative review, keep in mind that the reason I feel this way is because of these own personal feelings that I have. So my dislike of the movie probably says more about my own personal beliefs than it does about any objective quality about the movie itself. And then I would go on to be like, okay, well, the movie's like 3 hours, and the pacing could help a little bit, and stuff like that. And then I sort of deconstruct it from, film nerd standpoint. And I think people who are upset with identity politics or a movie being woke would benefit from looking at that. So let's say, because what's some of the more stupid criticisms I've heard. Prey. Prey, the Predator prequel that takes place in like the 17 or 1800s there. There were a lot of people who are like, oh, this is woke and it's terrible because how can a skinny little girl defeat the Predator and everything? And I'm like, how do you so badly misread a movie that way? Because, first of all, you're not just misreading Prey badly. If you have that feeling that you need to be a big tough guy to take on the Predator, you're also misreading the original film terribly, where specifically you have the most jacked up and armed to the teeth men, and none of that works against the Predator. Like, one of the best scenes in that movie is where they're all just firing a fucking Gatling gun into the jungle, and it does nothing. That's not the point of the movie. And then in Prey, it's not like she is suddenly like a Mary Sue or whatever, where she's suddenly like great. She like fails to capture the mountain lion. We see her trial and fail throughout the movie before she finally gets there. But part of that also goes to the CinemaSins-ification of film criticism. Now, I have no problem with CinemaSins itself. CinemaSins, if you're not aware, but you probably are, it's a YouTube channel where they basically have a lot of nitpicky criticisms about... They're not real criticisms, they're nitpicky criticisms about movies that are done for humorous effect. It's not meant to be serious film criticism, it's meant to be comedy, but occasionally people will take it seriously, like the director of Kong Skull Island, and they'll throw a hissy fit, and then there's like a day every 6 months where Twitter just hates on CinemaSins. It's like, it's not meant to be serious criticism, it's meant to be a comedy show. Do you think like, oh, this movie is objectively worse than this other movie because it has too many logos at the beginning? I mean, we all hate the fucking logos at the beginning, those are getting crazy. But that's not serious, it's meant to be funny, it's not, nitpicking some of that stuff. It's like, it's kind of also one of my other big things, which is apropos of nothing here, is when people say, like, oh, that movie has plot holes, but they're not using the term plot holes correctly. Like, plot hole isn't something that's far-fetched in a movie, or it's not that when a character's behavior is different from the way you would act in that situation. A plot hole is if there's something that happens in the story that completely breaks the plot or the story because it doesn't make sense within the universe the film itself has created. But people use the phrase plot holes incorrectly all the fucking time. Like, it's not a plot hole if it's fucking far-fetched, it's just far-fetched. It might be bad writing, but it's not necessarily a plot hole. Anyway, so I think Prey is an example there where it's sort of like, if you have a problem with a petite woman being able to take down the predator, that's not really a problem with the film. The film is showing her progression and how she builds, and the Predator films in general are sort of about how, it's not the macho man who can defeat the guy with more guns and more muscles. It's about, their thinking and covering themselves in mud and all that stuff. And you had a lot of that with the Star Wars sequel trilogy as well. Now, I have a lot of problems with those movies, especially the two that JJ did. I'm a defender of Rian Johnson's Last Jedi. But a lot of people had a problem with Rey, and I have problems with the Rey character. I feel that she is underwritten and doesn't quite have her own personality, but a lot of people were just like up in arms that this woman with very little experience can wield the Force well, but Luke doesn't have a lot of experience when he starts to wield the Force well either. I mean, I guess because you see more of his training in Empire itself, it's an entire B-plot that takes up more of it. But in that first movie, what's now called A New Hope, but was just called normal Star Wars, Luke's a whiny little bitch in that whole movie, and nobody seems to have a problem with that anymore, in hindsight. People also had problems. They had problems with Rose, and maybe it was because she was Asian, or maybe they just didn't like Last Jedi, or they had a problem that our three main characters in Force Awakens are a woman, a black man, and a Hispanic man. So, yeah, it seems like people are criticizing movies just because they don't like diversity, equity, or inclusion. It's like, why? What? And then there are some people who are like, oh, I don't mind if there's a gay character, but why are there so many, or something like that? And I'm like, you do realize that the phrase token blank character came about because of that, right? That you had a bunch of white cis men who were like, I can deal with one gay character, I can deal with Chuck and Bob on Soap, but actually no, it was Billy Crystal's character on Soap was the gay one, not Chuck and Bob. My apologies there for fellow Soap fans. It's been a while since I've watched that show. But if you have that, then it's too many. Then you're pushing it in my face. Ooh, it's like, so where's the ceiling? If 90% of the cast is white and straight, and 10% is gay or trans or bi or non-binary, is that too much for you? What if it's only 80 that's straight and white? What if it's only 70? Like, I get that straight and white, not necessarily just male, but straight and white has been the default human being in American artwork since ever. And so if you have, like, more than two characters, then suddenly you're shoving it down my throat, how dare? It's like, what? Are you really bothered by that? Are you bothered that there are fewer white people in movies? We're still the majority in all of movies. In all of movies, like, like most of the screenwriters are still white men. Most of the directors are still white men. Most of the actors you'll see in Hollywood are still white for the most part. It's like, are you afraid of like losing control, ceding power? You're writing reviews or you're filming reviews on YouTube. You're not even making movies, so they're not taking anything away from you. I mean, it's like they're afraid that if Jordan Peele makes more movies, then that'll take the job away from the movie I want to make. It's like, no, Jordan Peele is very talented and he's made 3 very good movies. That's why he's making movies, and they're also making money. So it's just something that bothers me because it just seems like it's not actual criticism of the film or the work. It's people trying to launder their own prejudice and claiming that it's the movie's problem if it doesn't parrot their bigoted beliefs back to them, which I don't get, and it's not valid to say that. It's like, oh, that movie's too woke. Like, no, it's not. It's like, is it delivering its message poorly? Then say that, and then provide specific examples from the movie. Like, there was also a movie that wasn't criticized for being woke, but was criticized for its politics, was Don't Look Up. So Adam McKay's movie about the comet coming to Earth, the whole thing's a huge metaphor for inaction and non-belief toward climate change, all that stuff. You had people who were sympathetic to that message, like, hey, I believe in climate change, but I think this movie is heavy-handed, or the humor doesn't work. I happen to really like the movie, but I understand there's other people who didn't, and most of their criticisms are pretty valid. I may not agree with them, but of criticism being valid doesn't mean you agree with it. It just means it's taking examples from the text and it's extrapolating them. It's like, okay, maybe the beat is here, maybe there's too much of a linorama here, maybe the scene goes on too long. It's like, fine, maybe I can accept that. Maybe on an individual scene-by-scene level I can agree with some of you. So use that language, because people weren't, maybe there were, but I didn't hear a lot of people complain that that movie was woke. I just heard people complain that it was too heavy-handed or they thought the humor wasn't funny. And that's sort of the way I think some of these people could approach these movies. And I think it's probably that some people are just leaning toward the right-wing dog whistle because that's the word of the moment. And so that's the, oh, well, if this movie is shoving this message down my throat and it's not doing it well, then that we attach the word woke to that. And it's like, no, woke is specifically a right-wing dog whistle that's used. And what I mean by dog whistle is that there's an under-the-surface meaning to it on top of what's there, which is basically that this thing is liberal or gay or black or whatever. And it's part of, if you live in the United States, there's only 2 major political parties. You have the Democrats, who are mostly centrist, in my opinion, but sometimes they lean a little bit left. And then you have the Republican Party, which goes from right-wing to super far-right, almost neo-Nazi at this point. The right-wing, the Republican Party specifically exists in the United States to advance the economic policies of the rich, of the bourgeoisie. But the thing is, like, low taxes for billionaires isn't popular widespread. So in order for the Republican Party to maintain their power or maintain their voter base of approximately 45 to 50% of the United States, they need something else that will appeal to non-rich people. And so they launder in this social, the social warrior stuff, their identity politics things. So that's why they do like the abortion thing and the anti-trans bills and all that stuff. Because a poor person in West Virginia, if you tell him, hey, your boss is an asshole and he's stealing the value you create for his business, they might be like, yeah, that's right. So he's not going to agree with the economic policy. That coal miner isn't going to agree with the economic policy that's going to help, some billionaire make more money or afford another yacht. But that poor person might be super religious, and they may have been raised in a bigoted household that's been bigoted since the civil rights movement, and so they will latch on to be like, oh, trans people are going to take all your sports trophies away, or whatever the fuck they're afraid of these days. And so they end up using these social issues that most of the elected Republicans don't actually believe in or give a fuck about. They're just trying to line their own pockets. And then that's how they maintain their control. And then anything else is the liberal elite or the powerful people up there. I'm like, liberal elite in Hollywood, bitch. Donald Trump was a fucking... he's a fucking billionaire who had a reality show, and, you know, what's his name? Steve Mnuchin, he's a producer, he's a movie producer. Steve Bannon, he was a producer on fucking Seinfeld. These people are the Hollywood elite. They're fooling you. You're morons. You're just eating up you're eating up the slop they're serving you so that they can line their own pockets. You're brainwashed, and then you claim everyone else is a sheep or a snowflake. That's another thing that bothers me, when people use the term snowflake. Because as far as I know, people using snowflake as a pejorative comes from Fight Club. And as someone who has multiple signed copies of the book Fight Club, has met the author twice, and has a Fight Club tattoo on my back, you're using that term incorrectly. Tyler Durden is not the hero of Fight Club, yet some of his anti-capitalist stuff is good, but then he just turns it into a right-wing neo-Nazi group. And you're a fucking idiot. So, anyway, I needed to rant a little bit about that, just because I'm so tired of going on YouTube, and then because YouTube knows that this guy only likes videos about movies, they push some rando I've never heard of, and it's like, oh, it's woke, oh, the Marvels are woke, oh, Ant-Man, oh, go woke, go broke, or whatever. It's like, fuck, what the fuck are you talking about? if you don't like the movie, first of all, I mean, whatever. I mean, Captain Marvel is a cute little movie that has a nice cat, and Sam Jackson's funny in it, and there's a fun moment with Jude Law at the end. If you're super fucking upset because Brie Larson won't fuck you, grow up. Just take the movie as it is. Like, yes, it's not great. It has some flaws as the normal Marvel stuff, but it opened years ago. Get over it. It's like or even, let's take a movie that I do hate. Ghostbusters 2016. Terrible movie. But some people hated it because, oh, it's a liberal movie and you put 4 women as Ghostbusters and, I'm like, no, that's not why the movie's bad. The movie's bad because it's not funny, because it doesn't understand the universe and the humor of the original Ghostbusters, because all of the fans of Ghostbusters were clamoring for a in-universe sequel and didn't want a reboot to begin with, and the last act of that movie tries to make them action heroes where they're shooting guns and being tough in this ugly CGI green fog. That's, no. Or the villain of Ghostbusters 2016 is like this cringy incel guy, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of assholes in the world who are like that. If you see yourself in that villain, look inside, don't look to the movie. Plus, the one good idea that movie has is having a human villain who kills himself to become a ghost and be more powerful against the Ghostbusters. That's a legitimately great idea. The movie drops the ball on it, but it's a good idea. I mean, no problem with that idea. That was, works well. Movie doesn't. Movie's fucking terrible, but so it's, and that's also the thing, is because the anti-woke criticism becomes the one that everyone knows of, then the backlash against that becomes even stronger when it doesn't deserve. Because when people were attacking Ghostbusters 2016 for the non-legitimate right-wing reasons, you suddenly had like a pull in the other direction with the fucking Hillary Clinton bots, who are just like, well, the first Ghostbusters isn't even that good of a movie anyway, or this movie's great. I'm like, look, you don't have to pretend Ghostbusters 2016 is a good movie because you don't like the right-wing chuds who hate it. I don't like them either, and I still recognize it's a terrible movie. So it ends up also spoiling the discourse in that way when you don't have good faith criticisms or analysis of a work of art. If you're just jumping back to your right-wing dog whistle, you're not even engaging with the work. You're just being a dick. So, anyway, what do you think, if you've even watched all of this long rant? Using woke as a pejorative, are you for it, against it? Have you done it? Will you stop doing it? I'm pretty sure at this point, since my politics are pretty on my sleeve in a lot of these videos, that I don't have any right-wing viewers at this point anyway. So I don't think I'm going to piss off that many people unless they happen to stumble upon this when they're like, hey, I wonder what Chicken Fry Guy's up to. So thanks, everybody. Anyway, if you want to read my reviews of any of the movies I've mentioned in this video, or any, go to my letterbox, letterbox.com/LennonHawk. You can get more of my politics on Twitter, since I tend to keep the YouTube a little bit more movie-centric these days, as opposed to going into all my my commie shit. But plenty of my commie shit will be on my socials, the Twitter, the Insta, the TikToks, all of that good stuff. But thanks, everybody. Stay woke.